Welcome back, everyone, to our final session of the day. We're going to give everyone just about 2 minutes to file in here, and then we will get started with our panel discussion. Thank you. And welcome back, everyone. We're going to give everyone maybe 60 more seconds here to file in, and then we'll get started with the final session. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone, to the May Digital Health Virtual Program, Securing Your Digital Future. My name is Matt Rayner, publisher here at Healthcare Innovation. It is now time for our final session of the day, Medical Device Security, What You Really Need to Know. We want to thank our friends at Imprivata for their support with this session. In case you missed our first few sessions of the day, I'll just mention real quickly that we welcome questions for our faculty today and with this final session. You could submit a question using the chat box within the Zoom platform. All of these sessions are being recorded, will be made available on demand by the end of the day today. As I mentioned at the beginning of today, if you have been enjoying this security-focused content, we do hope that you can join us at one or a few of our in-person cybersecurity forums scheduled to resume in the second half of the year, starting in July in Denver. If you name a major city, chances are we're going to be there or pretty close to that major city. We hope we get to see you in person at one of our events in the second half of this year. With that said, I would love to welcome on our senior editor, David Raths, who is our moderator for this panel discussion. David, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Well, today we have a great panel here to talk about medical device security. You know, a 2018 class report found that most chief information officers surveyed were not confident in their medical device security strategy. But today, many health systems are making concerted efforts to bolster these programs to do, device inventory, patch management, compensating control. So we're going to hear from a few of those today. So joining us today are Michael Archuleta, CIO of Mount San Rafael Hospital in Colorado, Anahi Santiago, Chief Information Security Officer at Christiana Care in Delaware, and Sean Kelly, Imprivata's Chief Medical Officer, and who also practices medicine and teaches at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. So before we dive into the topic, why don't we go around and have each of you describe briefly your organization and your responsibilities there, and then we'll get into the questions. So let's start with Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Honored to really be here, ladies and gentlemen. This is an amazing topic. My name is Michael Archuleta. I'm the Chief Information Officer with Mount San Rafael. My overall key element moving forward is, we're seeing the acceleration of digital transformation, and it's really here. We've seen the mass adoption of telecommunicating initiatives and the explosive changes to really happen in our industry. Moving forward, one of my key elements is really focusing on cultural change. The reprioritization of information technology is such a critical element, and the reprioritization of cybersecurity and continuing to incorporate it as a core component to the overall organizational strategy is such a successful point. So my key element, ladies and gentlemen, is continuing to focus on digital acceleration, continuing to focus on innovation, cybersecurity, and really taking our industry to just other heights and other differences, especially with the mass adoption of value-based care coming into the mix of things. And again, risks and complexities create risk, and we have to be due diligent of what we basically do and continue to keep that security as one of our top priorities.
Okay, great. Anahi?
Hi, yes, good afternoon. Anahi Santiago. I am the Chief Information Security Officer for Christiana Care. Christiana Care is the largest health system in the state of Delaware, serving the 3 neighboring states. We are an organization that really truly believes that through technology technology and enablement, we can improve and change the way that care is delivered across not only our region, but the nation. And so as the leader over information security, it is my role to enable that vision and that mission. And it's great to hear Michael talk about making sure that there's integration between cybersecurity, innovation, and digital transformation, because that is truly the only way that we're going to be able to be successful. And as I develop my strategy to align with the organizational strategy, I see medical devices integral to that mission and vision in terms of pushing the care towards the home and where patients want to consume that care. Our leadership often says if it can be delivered digitally, it will be consumed digitally. And if it can be delivered at home, it will be consumed at home. And so with that vein, I am looking at our information security roadmap to ensure that we can allow that type of mantra to be successful.
Okay, great. And Sean?
Thank you, David and Anahi and Michael. Nice to hear you talk about digital identity and digital maturity and progress. My name is Sean Kelly. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Imprivata, where I head up a whole clinical workflow team. And I'm also, as Dave mentioned, a practicing emergency physician in Boston at Beth Israel Deaconess. And I sat on the hospital administrative side for a number of years running the graduate medical education program. So have a bit of a perspective on some of the issues around balancing security and compliance and privacy with actual usability. And so like many of you, my passion is helping to bridge the gap between this perfect storm of really good consumer grade technology, but how does it work in the medical world? And in the world of healthcare, as we all know, is different, it's complex, and bringing technology into that world can be messy. It's a high stakes game. And so part of what I like to do is really try to understand on the real front lines, how does technology actually work when you put it in the hands of those that really need to use it most, the doctors and nurses. And so very much look forward to the discussion today and some of the real life aspects of bridging that, technical and security components into the real world of medicine.
Great, thanks. So my first question is for Anahi. As health systems like Christiana start deploying new technologies that offer greater visibility into the risk posture of medical devices on their network, what are some of the potential benefits? And what does it allow the organization to do that it couldn't do before in terms of security?
That is a great question. Over the last few years, technologies have come to the market that have enabled us to get better visibility to medical devices in terms of not only where our medical devices are, the types of assets that we have, but also the communication protocols that these devices are engaging in. Visibility into the types of other devices that they're talking to and the types of communications that they're leveraging, as well as really true visibility into the types of vulnerabilities that are resident on those devices, whether it's outdated operating systems or unpatched vulnerabilities, to really be able to paint a risk picture and enable our somewhat limited, constrained staff to prioritize and respond to those high-risk critical areas. It has also enabled us to do risk management in a way that helps us to articulate to the business, to the clinicians, the owners of those devices, around the types of risks that are being introduced into our environment, and enable the business in non-technical terms to do risk management much in the same way that we have traditionally done it in the IT space. So the technologies are maturing, and I do believe that they're going to create additive value as they continue to mature in the medical device security space.
Great. I was going to turn to Michael and just say, you talked a little bit about the culture of cybersecurity. Can you talk a little bit about how medical device security fits into that larger effort to build culture around cybersecurity there at your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much again. I think, and this is why I say this, is medical devices, which is definitely a critical issue that we need to continue to basically focus on, is in the end, complexity really creates risks, as I always state. And we have to really reprioritize the overall culture of what IT and cybersecurity basically brings into the overall organization moving forward. Because again, if we can really incorporate IT and cybersecurity as that core component to the overall organizational strategy, this isn't just a technology makeover, but a business revolution. And one of my issues that we continue to see, because again, the medical device industry has a lot of problems involved with it. 83% that are basically mandated by the FDA have admitted that they have a cybersecurity issue. And healthcare, with several antiquated systems that we basically have in place, if we are not being due diligent and having that understanding and continuing to be able to invest in these initiatives, that's going to be the critical component, is continuing to invest. And how do we continue to invest? That's basically by really recreating and building a strong foundation of cultural changes within the organization. Because if we look at this as a whole, is that establishing a strong cybersecurity culture that really advocates the need that everyone, including executive leadership and management, has an equal part in cybersecurity, because it is not only an IT responsibility, but an overall organizational responsibility. Because securing information and systems that really support the healthcare organization really involves, again, much more than technology, ladies and gentlemen. And it's, again, oftenly mistakenly viewed as only the information security organization's responsibility. So that's why I basically state is the reprioritization of IT and cybersecurity is such a critical component in incorporating any successful outcomes moving forward. Because if our board of directors and the remaining executive teams don't understand cybersecurity, don't understand technology, then that becomes an issue to continue to invest in strong initiatives that basically allow us to have that overall Hawkeye view, especially when we're looking at HIOT devices within our overall network itself. So again, I'm just one of those individuals that really is passionate about everything that has happened with the acceleration of digital transformation, and honestly, if we look at this as a whole, this crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, has fully displayed the value that IT and cybersecurity bring to the actual table. And I think if we continue, again, to focus on digital transformation and really incorporate cybersecurity as a whole and a core component to the overall organizational strategy, this will take us to a much better place moving forward, ladies and gentlemen. Because honestly, when we see our system as a full, the healthcare industry has been behind the curve when it comes to technology advancements. The healthcare system has been one of those industries that we went from the top 10 most attacked industry to now the top 7 most attacked industry. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a major problem still moving forward. And I'm an individual of numbers. I'm a CIO. I love bringing data. I love bringing numbers. And I want to share this real quick with you because of the concerns that we see, is that 83% of healthcare systems are still running on outdated software and unsupported operating systems, such as, believe it or not, Windows XP, Windows 7, which again really leave devices vulnerable to hackers really exploiting COVID-19, the attacks of opportunity. And today, 16% of imaging systems are at a 51% risk of getting hacked. And there is a 26% chance that 14% of patient monitoring tools will get attacked. And that 27% of medical devices, again, are running Windows XP, Windows 7, decommissioned versions of Linux operating systems. And the number of stolen medical records, ladies and gentlemen, have increased by 65%, impacting 40 million American lives. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have an issue with cybersecurity.
Yeah, Michael, that's really fascinating stuff. Let me turn to Sean for a sec. Sean, because you work as a hospital physician as well as for Imprivata, which is known for its identity management solutions, can you put on your clinician hat first and tell us what challenges you've experienced or witnessed around medical device security in your clinical work, and how that field is evolving?
Yeah, and just following on some of the things that Anahi and Michael said, the clinical workflows and the human factors and the culture of cybersecurity is paramount. And what really needs to happen is we have to stop looking at this as a tug of war between either you get security and privacy and compliance on the one hand, or you get usability and productivity and efficiency on the other. Because the truth is you need both, and you actually need more of both. So any good technology, any good governance and policy and culture needs to account for that and actually say, look, we need the cybersecurity and the privacy compliance of this technology, but the right thing to do actually has to be easier for doctors and nurses and techs to do. Because some of the things Michael just mentioned, right? Vital sign monitors, CAT scans, MRIs, infusion pumps. So it's all great if everyone sits here and says, oh my gosh, we have a huge problem. We got to lock these things down because we're vulnerable to ransomware. And if our system goes down, well, we're held hostage and we have to shut down for a couple of weeks. And this is not theory. This is happening right now in whole countries, right? In Ireland, in major systems here in the US and elsewhere. It's not theory, it's happening. But what happens if you lock all those systems down and you make them unusable? Well, I can't do my job, right? Like I need to, and our nurses need to actually run that infusion pump to give those antibiotics to that patient that's septic. You can't block them out of those devices, but those devices aren't made to be usable with advanced security measures in place, right? In many cases, just the development time and the production cycles and the maintenance and the security patching issues on a lot of these devices, they take forever compared to the world of cybersecurity, never mind technical advancement. I mean, think of your cell phones from 10 years ago. That's what some of this medical equipment is. It could be 10 years old, but because of FDA cycles and approvals and things and lack of standards, we've had to sort of adapt and use that equipment as best we can. And then you try to layer in some security on top of it. And so to circle to your original question, what are some issues we experience on the front lines? Well, you try putting in a password on a device that's in the midst of a huge room full of ICU equipment right next to the patient's bedside, who might have COVID, by the way, and you're in full PPE, and it's beeping, and you need to get down there underneath here to look up here to hit buttons that aren't made to be used to hit a password without a keyboard that's really usable. And the thing, there's either that, or you may use shared passwords, or it may come with the manufacturer's passwords, and savvy patients look it up and say, okay, Philips device, infusion pump, here's the stock password, let's try that. Oops, it works. Guess what happens to that, to the morphine, PCA, dial that up and patient overdoses. So there's usability issues, there's security issues. And just to finish up, I think you need more of both. You can't force a tug of war. We have to work together, to echo what Michael and Ani said. There has to be a culture of the cybersecurity working with human factors and taking into account clinical workflows above all else.
When you have those older devices, those kind of legacy or end of life devices, is network segmentation one of the possible ways to deal with those?
Yeah, and I'll defer to others, but absolutely, I think there's there are a number of different strategies here, and I think that network segmentation is one of several, but absolutely limiting the damage to compartmentalizing it. And we'll talk, I think, a little bit about zero trust in a bit, and we'll talk about some other factors here. But I'd actually defer to the others who are more technically qualified than I am to answer that.
Yeah.
I think. Go ahead, Annie.
I was just going to say, I would assert that the network segmentation is one of the more successful compensating controls when it comes to any type of vulnerable device, whether it's a medical device, an IoT device, or just a system running an outdated application that just cannot be upgraded for whatever reason. But there are other things like cutting them off from the internet, really looking at the device to plug in unused USB ports. The new technologies that David, you had asked me about, now can give us visibility as to whether it is utilizing a default password. So potentially being able to mass change passwords for any given type of device. So, when we look at vulnerabilities that are introduced into our network, we always look at what are the compensating controls that are most effective in that particular scenario, and how many of them can we apply with the least amount of disruption.
Michael, did you want to chime in too?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really, I agree in regards to all those specific items. I think smart segmentation is such a critical element. I think, risk mitigation and segmentation is a key starting point, but there's several additional items that really need to be incorporated with this as well too, when we're focusing on medical devices. I mean, that comes from asset management, again, smart segmentation, threat defense, operational analytics, risk analytics in place that are basically happening. You have to have that Hawkeye view of your environment to really react and create those specific remediation processes moving forward and successfully as well. But again, smart segmentation is definitely a good start to at least trying to stop an attack in flowing over into different specific networks as well.
Okay. Anai, you mentioned in your intro talking about care into the home as being kind of one issue going forward. Can you talk, there's been such an emphasis during the pandemic on remote patient monitoring, extending care into the home. How does that challenge your medical device security posture? And are there some solutions or additional training required around that?
Once the pandemic hit, the push to virtual care and care at home became truly magnified. But to Michael's original point, it demonstrated that it can be successful and that it can deliver on clinical value beyond what I think any of us even imagined. And so it's here to stay. And for an organization like Christiana Care, we want to move very quickly to leverage these capabilities so that we can really transform the way that we're delivering care. And what that does from a cybersecurity perspective is that it requires us to gain a level of visibility into an environment where we have zero visibility. And so I think about my career when it started 16 years ago in healthcare leadership. And my biggest concern was securing the data center. I wasn't even that concerned about the medical devices because they were pretty much air gapped. They were contained within their own networks and didn't really talk to anything. And then as EHRs became more prevalent, there was a requirement to have those medical devices have connectivity to the EHRs so that there was some integration and interoperability. It also required those medical devices to call out to the internet so that the vendors could actually assist in the management and support of those devices. And so little by little, we started to have to think about how to secure cloud environments and interconnected medical devices. Well, fast forward to now, we're having to figure out how to protect devices as our four walls are truly dissolving. And these devices are going into patients' homes where we probably can assume that the routers that connect the patient's homes to the internet are not secure. They're probably running default passwords and open systems. These devices might need to connect either via an app or through some sort of tethering device to a patient's mobile device or to a patient's home computer that is most likely not running the most outdated operating system. It may or may not be running antivirus software. It probably has not been patched in quite some time. And so all of the security controls that we currently employ within our network or that we expect our cloud providers, whether they're software as a service or infrastructure as a service, that we expect them to have and that we can contractually hold them to maintain, that all goes out the window when we're putting these things inside a patient's home. And much like the challenges that we have within our own network, these devices, they not only age, but vulnerabilities are identified on any given day, week, or month. And we have enough challenges having to maintain and manage vulnerabilities within our network. How do we now get updates to patients' homes?
Oh, God.
Then these are patients that are probably the most challenged and least versed in technology. And so there's an ecosystem now that has sort of well from the ground up around having to figure out how to not only protect these devices in patients' homes, but treat the patients on how to use the devices and how to protect the devices, and then teach our clinicians, who are the ones that are interacting with the patients, about how to dialogue in terms of technology and security in a way that a patient who's not technical can understand. And so there's a lot of complexity here that we're just starting to figure out. And we've got a long way to go before we get really good at this. But the pace at which our organizations want to move isn't going to allow us the time to get really good. And so we've got to figure it out real quick.
Great. Sean, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think a lot of the points that have been brought up are spot on. And I agree that healthcare is a continuum. Gone are the days where you get the four walls of a hospital or an office and it's a fortress and, and you put up your wall and you protect it. Well, not only are people poking holes in it, but we're very intentionally poking our own holes in it. As Ani just said, we're deliberately extending care wherever we can digitally. So I think that one of the foundational concepts here is that in order to open up access and provide care in that manner, you also have to provide the cybersecurity and the culture, as Michael said. And in order to do that, you really have to have an understanding of digital identity, and not just of these devices or the networks, but of the users themselves, whether that's clinicians or providers or even patients or family. Because with that part in the mix, then you can actually start to understand who's accessing the system and how are they doing that. And then you can start to invoke that zero trust mentality of like, look, we're not just going to allow everybody in this location to access things openly, but we're going to check every time, right? And that protected health information within the EHR or the data that's on these devices or in these networks, every time someone's accessing it from somewhere, we're going to check what device and the path they're coming in on and their identity. And you know what, if that all rings true, then we're going to open it up and we're actually going to make it easier for them to access that information. But if something isn't right and if something flags, then we're going to lock it down more. And so as far as access and authentication and authorization, I think the digital identity is obviously key to all of that. And not just within the four walls of the hospital, but particularly as you extend that care outwards. And that is a problem that's always been existent for our endpoints, like our physical desktops and our virtual desktops and even our mobile devices. The problem is that now these medical devices that used to be mostly governed and fixed by people with tool belts and screwdrivers have evolved, and they've become software, and they are now, as Michael said, they are now vulnerabilities as well as strengths to provide care. And so we now have to account for that. And it's an interesting concept that in many places, I'd say probably about half places, the governance over some of the medical devices still doesn't even fall under IT or IS in many cases. It's facilities and maintenance and supply chain. And we see it moving in. And we see teams now accounting for that. But I think that's a big piece of this too, is who's ultimately responsible for this and guiding this strategy.
That was going to be one of my next questions is when you get to this medical device security project management, you have clinical engineering groups, you have someone like the chief information security officer, you have the CIO. Is it always clear who's in charge, or does it depend from organization to organization who's leading these projects?
I'll start and then we'll go around the horn.
Yeah.
I mean, we definitely see CISOs mostly involved and CIOs as well. And I will say that I think there's, particularly in the past year or so, and particularly through COVID, I mean, I personally and we as a company see CIOs and CISOs now taking more and more responsibility, because they realize that in the end, wherever the vulnerability comes from, in the end, they're responsible for that security. So, I mean, I'll turn it over to Ani, because I think, and Michael, but we see that migrating pretty quickly. And what was taking a long time, you know, over the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen a big inflection in the curve just in this past year with adoption of that.
Yeah, and I would agree to that as well. I think, again, you know, I always speak in regards to the reprioritization of IT. And it really depends, again, with, you know, where's your organization's security maturity level at, basically moving forward. You know, who does biomed answer to? I've seen a lot of organizations, unfortunately, having biomed answering to the facilities director, which again creates some additional risk on that standpoint as well. But it's such a critical element to reprioritize those specific initiatives and really continuing to bring those back into IT. I've seen a lot of good successful points where the CIO, of course, and the CISO really have main responsibilities of creating outcomes, because again, we're executing specific tools that allow us to have the visibility of the HIOT devices or anything that's connected to the overall network itself. So, you know, trying to regain and reprioritize those specific departments, it's such a critical and important aspect in creating better successful initiatives, especially in trying to determine your overall asset management within the organization itself, to really determine, what do you have? What does this organization have? And, you know, when I was reading those percentages, I mean, those are some scary numbers, especially with so many outdated specific software. And if we do not have visibility within that, or if that specific area is not reprioritized or regained into a specific IT department, then that creates some additional problems as well. And I've seen some unsuccessful points on that standpoint as well.
Nahi, do you want to weigh in on that at all?
Yes. So in the more mature organizations, it generally is the CISO that is leading the cybersecurity effort around medical devices, really any device or technology as a whole. But we do need to recognize that there are a lot of healthcare organizations, especially in the smaller to mid-sized organizations, that are still just trying to figure out how to do security, and that, you know, that security function may very well be a shared function between an IT person that does operations as well as security. And although the number of phone calls that I get from recruiters around the very first CISO has waned since, I would say, between 2013 and 2018, where I would get phone calls almost every day, big organizations still looking for their first CISO. There has to be recognition that the smaller organizations just can't afford a full-time security function, and so it becomes a shared responsibility. But certainly somebody in technology, as maturity grows, and then ultimately in security.
And some of those smaller organizations look to outsource this to a vendor, this responsibility?
I've seen more and more organizations utilize the vCISO function, where they'll hire a part-time security professional to assist. Those are still relatively expensive resources. And I think a lot of organizations that are still struggling are just trying to figure out how to do it on their own, or are still trying to figure out how to do the basic things like regularly patch management and vulnerability management, not just at the medical device space, but in the IT space as well.
So I understand that there was a recent executive order from the White House focused on cybersecurity. And could you talk about the impact that might have in the medical device security space?
Absolutely. I am very excited about the potential of this new executive order and what it will have, and the impact that it will have, not just on medical devices, but overall supply chain. And So for those that are not familiar, last Wednesday, I believe, the president signed an executive order around cybersecurity that had one section in particular that was really focused on supply chain and holding vendors that develop software and hardware technology, specifically those that do business with the federal government, holding them accountable for greater visibility into their cybersecurity practices, into how their software or technology is developed, and how they embed security into the overall products, and requiring the vendors to be able to lend transparency to what has traditionally been a pretty dark place in terms of us being able to see what we're truly connecting to our network. And in terms of the medical device space, where this becomes particularly optimistic is that we as an industry have been pushing really hard on the medical device vendor space to give us what we call software bill of materials, and have been working on a standard around how medical device vendors can deliver to their customers software bill of materials, which are essentially a laundry list of components that are embedded within their devices. So to think about the FDA required ingredients list that is on the side of a cardboard box. We have been pushing for this for medical devices for a long time. And we believe that through this executive order and this demand for transparency, that the medical device manufacturers will be especially motivated to, or even required to provide that transparency. And although this is only required at the federal level, it's going to have a trickle-down effect, because if a developer has to do this for products that they're selling to the federal government, they're going to do it for all of their products. And I did, as I shared with our during our prep call, I did have an opportunity to hear Suzanne Schwartz from the FDA opine on the impact that this is going to have on medical device security, and she too is optimistic that this new order is going to have an overarching impact into the work that we've endeavored. And the FDA, I think, is also optimistic and pushing for more enforcement capability beyond just guidance, so that they too can affect what these vendors are doing and the transparency that they're providing to their customers.
So looking backwards, did you have to build this into business associate agreements or contract language, what your policies are and what the company's responsibilities were to your organization?
Absolutely, and there is a vehicle for giving cybersecurity professionals some transparency and view into these medical devices via the MDS-2 forms. But we haven't always had success in having medical device vendors complete those. And honestly, part of the time, they're not completed correctly, because the actual medical device vendors don't always understand what's underneath their own hood. And so the hope is that through this, they will be truly required and accountable. And then absent, all of this visibility and transparency, we have had to go with the contractual route in terms of putting terms into contracts, holding them to transparency, to vulnerability management, to providing patches, to ensuring that they don't use out-of-the-box passwords and require encryption. So we've been, through contracts, working to push, but collectively as an industry, the change has to be driven at a higher level, and I see that tide changing.
Okay. Michael, do you have anything you want to weigh in on working with the vendors?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just on Ahi's point, I think creating a vendor-provider relationship partnership is such a critical element as well. And I think, again, with some of those new initiatives coming out of the federal government of really creating transparency is such a critical element. Because, if you even look at some of the actual numbers, that 83% of all medical device companies have admitted that they have cybersecurity problems. That's becoming a major issue. And then again, when some of these specific vendors are still continuing to build their specific proprietary software on Windows 7 operating systems that are extremely vulnerable within your environment, I mean, those creates risk, ladies and gentlemen. And I think, again, is creating that strong vendor provider relationship and partnership is such a critical element. You know, re-enhancing the business associate agreement, you know, adding in those specific verbiages and making sure that the vendors are taking responsibility and accountability for their specific actions as well. Because in the end too, I mean, if some of these specific vendors don't take the accountability, the initiatives needed to, you know, to do, and they've always been protected, and of course, we're not going to see advancements. Of course, we're not going to see, you know, strong cybersecurity policies and procedures incorporated into their process itself. But I really think with some of these new initiatives that are really coming down the planes of things, is that transparency and really having full visibility, full understanding of what is coming into your environment is going to be a huge game changer moving forward.
And we, I'll weigh in on that too, David. We do see a change from the hardware vendors where they're actually being proactive and understanding with some of these usability and security vulnerabilities that they're not expert in the workflow. And so they're actually partnering with us at Imprivata as one example to put an authentication layer on top of a lot of these devices and then really just digging into the workflows and, you know, really understanding, well, okay, when does an authentication event need to happen? How can it happen? What's the best practice on other endpoints, right? Can you tap a badge here instead of typing in a huge password? And if so, when is that acceptable versus when do you need two factors, right? And when do you actually need to do an authenticated event and provide that logical access control? And when do you need to kind of quotes fail open so the nurse or whoever can do their job? Is it really at the time when you do the vital signs? Or should you let the nurse do that at any point he or she needs to? But it's really when that data gets entered into the EHR or other vulnerable networks, that's when the authentication event happens. And so the devil's in the details there. And what we're seeing is an increased willingness, and even proactively, to partner with other ecosystem partners, as well as with healthcare systems themselves, to really work together on this. And I think, again, this is circling back to Michael's opening point, where cybersecurity is a cultural sea change. It's not just a playbook or one person, the CISO or whoever it's farmed out to with a checklist of stuff. It's really involving all the users, it's involving all the vendors and the partners together to say, like, here's how the ecosystem needs to work in order to preserve the ability for those of us on the front lines to do our job. And here's how, you know, here's where and how it really needs to be locked down. You know, and just to put some more reality on it, to go back to that infusion pump, you just need to check that authentication at the time when you change a dose. Like, as important as it is for me to go and change a dose, if I don't have the right credentials, you can't let me just dial up or down a dose, because that could kill someone if it's done incorrectly. And you really need accountability for that. And, you know, to hack into that system and take over a pacemaker or another heart device, obviously, you know, you really need to have a lockdown, secure authentication event in those areas. So we see a change from hardware vendors working with other software vendors and partners.
Well, Sean, you mentioned this concept of zero trust architecture earlier. Can you expand on that a little bit if people in the audience aren't that familiar with that term?
Yeah, and I'll give you my you know, ER doctor who knows just enough about security and technology to be dangerous, and then I'll let our other experts weigh in too. But the whole idea really is a paradigm shift. It's, instead of creating a firewall and a fortress and, you know, having some, you know, chosen geographies where you're going to leave things more open and others where you're not, or you know, picking things that way, you flip the model and you say, look, we're not going to trust really anything without checking some things first, right? We're gonna check identities of whatever user it is, whatever machine or location it's coming from. We're gonna check whatever network it's on. We're gonna check the access control. Are they authenticating properly? Do they have access and authorization for this? And so it's really, think of, you know, almost like every time someone pings a data set, a medical record, a device, you're verifying that person's identity is known, that the device is known, that the location is known. And then, you're doing a lot of those other things you talked about before to mitigate any problems, because, most security professionals will say it's not if you're being breached, it's kind of when and how often. And so just plan for it and control and mitigate. I'll turn it over to you guys who are more experts, but I think to us at least, and to me as a provider, what's key is accounting for workflows in that model to say, look, if there's zero trust, you can lock everything down and make it completely unusable. But then every bit that you gain on cybersecurity risk mitigation, you lose on patient safety and care, because I can't do my job. And by the way, I'll just work around it, because there's nobody better at working around bad security than nurses and doctors and techs. So I'll turn it over to you guys for further commentary.
So zero trust is a word that's now being thrown around a lot by a lot of people, and it means a lot of different things depending on who's using it and why they're using it. And so I would say that zero trust, Sean, I think you articulated it succinctly. We used to trust on that the firewalls and the perimeter were the thing that we needed to protect, and everything else in between was just jello. And that was okay because of the threat models. And now that we're truly distributed in the way that we deliver care and the way that we do work, we need to take a look at how we employ security differently. And back in the late 90s, the term was default deny. It hasn't really changed. It is exactly that. It's don't trust, deny by default, and then the architect in a way that the things that are supposed to get in are able to do so. But for those that don't understand it or rush to do it, are at danger of not doing it well, because default deny has many components. It has identities, it has devices, it has the network, it has applications, it has other components. And to try and boil the ocean by shutting everything down and then trying to open up will create the kinds of problems that Sean just described in terms of people not being able to do their roles, patient safety being at risk, and ultimately clinicians finding other ways to do it, which create other risks, because then we stop having the visibility and the intent of what we were looking to implement. And so as organizations start to think about employing a zero trust model, I really encourage them not to boil the ocean, to find a use case, whether it's identities, whether it's devices, whether it's network, and build out the use cases in such a way that they enable workflow before just trying to lock everything down, because those efforts will fail, and then we'll never truly get to a zero trust model that is effective.
Great. Michael, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the zero trust model is definitely a new, keyword that's really being a buzzword that's kind of coming out, and it does mean so much to different individuals. When we look at zero trust policies, I mean, you really think about it, zero trust policies really relies on real-time visibility into the user's credentials. And that's such a critical element. And when we're talking about two-factor authentication, identification management, and online ID verification, organizations are really starting to see a really big spike of demand with these specific items, because it's really being driven with COVID-19 and the acceleration of telecommuting applications, and really again the utilization and having the authentication portion within your organization, making sure that you have that security to access it in a seamless way. And that's one of those critical elements moving forward. And when we look at zero trust as a whole, it really focuses on authentication, authorization, and it continuously validates, security configurations and the overall posture of your security process, which is really important. For ourselves, we are an Imprivata customer. We've utilized two-factor authentication. We've utilized online ID verification and single sign-on initiatives, and creating better efficient ways and better ways of creating more enhanced security initiatives when we're trying to access specific systems. But again, the zero trust model is definitely one of those items that it really needs to be studied more and really incorporated and really learned from, I think, in some of these initiatives, because again, if it is not properly executed, it can be a major risk within the organization itself.
Great. Let me ask one more. How do you make a return on investment case to like an audit and compliance committee or an executive council for investing in doing this medical device security work? Can you show them that you're getting a better handle on device inventory and patch management and these compensating controls? Is it a tough sell to make to a group like that?
It depends on the organization and the culture. I think that there are models out there, such as the FAIR model, that can be used to map investment in security to risk reduction. I don't know that a lot of organizations have adopted such models. I also think for most, it's a risk management and patient safety discussion. And so if we as CISOs or CIOs, technology professionals, do a good job of being able to translate cybersecurity risks into clinical and business risks in a way that our stakeholders truly understand it, then the conversations around return on investment are more around what is the value of care that you would like us to partner with you to deliver, and what is the amount of risk that you are willing to consume in order to deliver that care. And then I think from there, it's about a balance. And there are times where we will be more willing to accept cybersecurity risk because the value of that clinical piece of technology far outweighs the cybersecurity risks. And we've had to make those decisions. And that's just, those are day-to-day conversations. And that's part of what true partnership looks like in the clinical and cybersecurity space.
Great.
And I like to add to that is really when I focus and speak with my board of directors, I focus on three elements. I look at the finance, the operations, and the reputational level of cybersecurity investments on cybersecurity breaches. Really building a storyline of understanding, again, like what would happen on a financial level if a cybersecurity breach happened? What would happen on an operational level? What would happen on a reputational level? If a cybersecurity breach happens, and really ask yourself and ask your team these specific initiatives. Because again, if you have the culture that's built around strong cybersecurity initiatives and really continuing to incorporate IT and cybersecurity as a core component to the overall organizational strategy, you will continue to basically allow yourself to continue to bring these initiatives to the board of directors to add some more investments that are extremely critical in reducing the risk within our organization.
Okay.
I'll add one thing is that in some ways we cherry pick because the solutions we're dealing with oftentimes actually increase productivity and efficiency. So there's actually an ROI in addition to the risk mitigation piece and the reputational piece, because I absolutely agree with everything both Michael and Ani said. It's even easier if the security parameters you're putting in, and this really lit up during COVID because so many places had to move to remote access, and then they had to have two-factor to let them on for a security standpoint. But if that wasn't easy to do, productivity really suffered. And so actually making it easier for folks to get on. And in some cases, this was, never waste a good crisis. I'm sure Michael did this. I'm sure you did this, Anahi. This was the chance to go ahead and enable better remote access that you've always been trying to do. Now you had the ultimate case with COVID to do that. And same with the medical devices where, if you can actually improve workflows while you increase security, it flips the script on the conversation. Now, it's not always that easy. And so I think that all the points made are completely germane. But if there's a way to make a business or operations case at the same time, it just becomes a much easier conversation. And that takes partnership between vendors and the provider side, to working together to justify budget internally. And this is where I have high hopes that when everyone works together on this, you can actually come up with business cases and operational and safety cases that make a lot of sense because you're working and you're tracking metrics together before, during, and after doing these implementations. So
great.
So.
We have one question from the audience before we wrap up and turn it back over to Matt. It says, do you foresee modalities like US and MR connecting to the internet for remote access by clinicians and not just to the modality manufacturers themselves?
You know, I'll start just because this is dear to my heart as someone who likes, and like Ani said, I love to extend care as much as we can. So we see, virtual health being used in cases where we see specialists now. I'm sure Christiana has like virtual ICU and specialty visits that they're extending out into the community. We do that at our hospital. And increasingly the ability to use technology remotely. You may have an ultrasound expert and a tech on the other end, and to be able to actually share that ability to take over controls and start to manipulate things on the fly. Radiology is already reading much from home, and in many ways is starting to push this paradigm. So short answer, yes, I see it evolving that way. And the basic tenets of the cybersecurity around it, as well as the usability, don't change from everything we talked about earlier. It's just a more advanced use case of it. You need access, you need connectivity, and it can be real time. And as was already said around the quotes, zero trust catchphrase, that's the game, right? You have to make sure you give proper access to the proper people at the proper time, but checking credentials and authentication and authorization and all that continuously, or at least, upon entry and exit maybe. And I'll defer to others if there's any other opinions, but that kind of stuff actually excites me because it's the delivery of digital care, in the borderless environment. And, as you're talking about home care, Anahi, it's a good example of it.
Okay. I think we're going to wrap up there and turn it back over to Matt to take us out.
Yes, thank you, David. And thank you to our panelists for this final fantastic session. A special thank you to our friends at Imprivata for making this panel possible. And honestly, another final thank you again to all of our wonderful faculty that we had today. I want to close by just stating that we welcome any and all feedback. Please do not be shy in reaching out to us to share what you thought of today's digital health virtual program. We will be resuming our digital health virtual program next month for the second half of the year, on June the 23rd, with our patient engagement virtual day, patient engagement trends and best practices. That program, as I mentioned, will kick off our second half of the year digital health virtual program schedule. If you registered previously for the first half of the year, you will need to go in and register again for the second half of the year and all of the programs that we have lined up. With that said, I would like to wish you all a fabulous evening, a great, hopefully long Memorial Day weekend. Chat soon and take care, everyone. Thank you.